Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking something genuinely fascinating. We're looking at one author's incredibly ambitious attempt to walk this kind of philosophical tightrope. They're trying to synthesize hard, rigorous academic science with deep, non-institutional spirituality. I mean, if you've ever felt like strict materialism just kind of leaves you cold, but institutional religion feels way too restrictive, well, you're in the right place. We're going to map out a totally different path today by decoding a modern manifesto of Neo Gnosticism. Let's get into it. Okay, let's dive into this. The author gives us this absolutely brilliant framing metaphor right off the bat. We will strike a spark between two stones and hope for a new perspective. Now, in the context of our journey today, think of these two heavy, seemingly opposite stones as science on one side and faith on the other. When you smash them together with enough force and intention, the friction doesn't destroy them, right? Instead, it creates a spark. And that spark, in this framework, is gnosis, a profound, newly illuminated truth. Section 1, the spark between two stones. We're looking at the ultimate paradox here. How someone can pledge allegiance to the ancient Apostles' Creed while heavily quoting the Czech Skeptics Club in the exact same breath. Section 2, what is ancient Gnosticism? Let's set the stage. So before we can really understand how a modern mind pulls off that paradox, we gotta know where it all started. The word gnostis comes from Greek, and it translates to knowledge. But actually, scratch that. It's not just regular book smarts we're talking about here. Ancient Gnosticism was this highly speculative, dualistic movement. And what that means is they basically believed the physical world was a mistake, like a fundamental error, totally separate from the pure spiritual realm. They were searching for a direct, suprasensory experience of the divine. Why? Well, to return the human essence back to its original divine unity. See, ancient Gnostics weren't trying to fix history or save the world. They looked around, saw a chaotic mess, and figured the only real solution was to escape it entirely through personal, direct revelation. Now, watch how this idea kind of morphs across time. It pops up in the 1st century AD in places like Syria and Egypt, growing right alongside early Christianity, and they heavily influenced each other, even though some Gnostic groups completely bucked early Christian orthodoxy. By the 4th century, mainstream institutions had pretty much stamped classical Gnosticism out. But here's the really wild part. It didn't actually die. Its philosophical DNA survived. It went underground and eventually wove its way into the modern era, directly influencing absolute giants of philosophy and psychology, people like G.W.F. Hegel and Carl Gustav Jung. That deep pursuit of direct, unfiltered knowledge, yeah, it just kept evolving. Moving on to Section 3, Science and Healthy Skepticism. Okay, so now we shift over to the science stone of our metaphor. And if you're sitting there thinking this is just going to be some loose, wishy-washy, mystical exploration, think again. The author grounds their entire spiritual worldview in rock-solid, verifiable academic sources. We're talking definitions from the Religionistics Department at Charles University, encyclopedias backed by the Sociological Institute of the Czech Academy of Sciences, and tracking modern religious trends through academic journals like Dinger. There is absolutely zero room for blind faith here. Before even touching the mystical side of things, the author absolutely insists on laying a foundation of critical, scientific study. And honestly, this next detail is just fascinating to me. One of their key sources is Sisyphus, the Czech Skeptics Club. Just think about that for a second. You have a self-proclaimed Christian Gnostic citing a secular, deeply scientific skeptics club as an absolute, non-negotiable tool for finding truth. They make the argument that you literally cannot seriously study any religious system or spirituality without applying a huge dose of scientific skepticism. It's basically your ultimate filter against self-deception. Which brings us to Section 4, the path of the modern neo-Gnostic. So what actually happens when you strike these two stones together? Well, you get a worldview that's been profoundly shaped by monumental archaeological discoveries, like the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Nag Hammadi manuscripts, and this brilliantly illustrates a really stark dividing line. Over on the left, you've got dogmatic Christianity. The source describes this as institutional, rule-based, and highly controlled. It's a structure that tends to avoid or sometimes outright discourages asking the really tough questions. But then, on the right, you have Gnostic Christianity. This path is all about personal, direct experience. It is fiercely independent. And the biggest thing? It demands that you question absolutely everything, driving your doubts all the way to the absolute bottom. You're not following a pre-drawn map. You are out there exploring the terrain for yourself. Section 5, 5 Rules for Seeking Truth. To actually navigate all that unmapped terrain, the author created a personal manifesto. It kicks off with step 1. You have to fully embrace scientific methodology, stuff like theology, sociology, psychology, and maintain incredibly strict critical thinking. But as we know, science alone isn't quite enough for the whole picture. So that leads us right into step 2, cultivating what they call an objective inner approach. Basically, you value human spirituality immensely as a treasure, but you keep it completely free from any sort of institutional control. And then step 3 brings it all together. This is where you use your 21st century critical lens to actively judge and filter that spirituality. It empowers you to deeply understand different spiritual paths while also being able to call out the dangers, the falsehoods, and the traps along the way. So the crucial point is rule number 4, conscious skepticism. And honestly, this is probably the hardest rule of them all to follow. The author argues that even if you have an incredibly profound, undeniably direct religious experience, you cannot just accept it blindly. You literally have to actively doubt it. You have to interrogate your own mind. The author actually notes that they learned this from people like the legendary sci-fi writer Philip K. Dick. Dick would have these intense mystical visions, but then he'd subject them to relentless, almost agonizing levels of rigorous skepticism. Now, to keep all that intense skepticism from just calcifying into pure arrogance, we have Rule 5, do not judge. Yes, the author absolutely commits to pointing out errors, but they pledge never to actually condemn the place of profound intellectual humility. It's a promise to stay totally open to dialogue and to be entirely willing to correct your own unconscious mistakes the second you're confronted with new evidence. Which leads us to our final part, Section 6, Teachers Ahead of Their Time. So who actually guides someone on a path that rejects traditional institutions? Well, look at this incredibly diverse roster. I mean, we've got legendary science fiction and cosmic horror writers like Philip K. Dick and H.P. Lovecraft. Then right next to them, we have the foundational analytical psychologist Carl Gustav Jung, standing alongside brilliant literary minds like Franz Kafka and Karl Čapek. We even have the scientific visionary Nikola Tesla sharing space with mystics like Rudolf Steiner and Carlos Castaneda. It's wild, right? But the author embraces these figures specifically because they were minds that leap so far ahead of their own time. It perfectly embodies this concept of unity and diversity. For the neo-Gnostic, there isn't just one single unified path to the truth. Instead, there's this deep respect for how each of these totally unique minds managed to unlock a different piece of the giant puzzle. Which brings us right down to it. We've just explored how one modern thinker bridges this massive gap between the strict scientific method and the ancient human desire for direct spiritual knowledge. But the real value of an explainer like this, it's turning that philosophical mirror back onto ourselves. So ask yourself, are you just sort of accepting the dogma that's handed to you? Are you relying strictly on a dry, materialistic view of the world? Or are you striking a spark between rigorous skepticism and your own direct experience? It's a heavy question, for sure, but it's one that just might illuminate an entirely new path for you. Keep questioning everything, and thanks for watching.